Exactly what have scientists, anthropologists, and archaeologists learned from ancient cities? Well, we're about to find out.
As an archaeologist, I've been fortunate in working in many different parts of the world. I've also been able to travel to many of our great world cities. And one of the things I realized as I dug in an ancient city and walked around a modern one is how much ancient and modern cities are exactly the same. They have monumental architecture, they have big broad avenues, they have neighborhoods where wealthy people live and neighborhoods for people who are not so wealthy. They have public plazas where people do a variety of different things, and they have specialized sporting arenas and musical venues and all kinds of entertainment. And so that became my question. Why is it that cities, both past and present, look so similar?
This is Dr. Monica Smith. Dr. Smith is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at UCLA. She is the director of the South Asian Archaeology Laboratory at the Kotsin Institute of Archaeology, and she's a professor at the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. Smith has spent much of her career digging into the world of ancient cities and their relation to cities all throughout the U.S. and the world today. Her archaeological field experience includes work in India, Egypt, Italy, Madagascar, Bangladesh, Tunisia, England, and the American Southwest. And as she spanned the globe over the years, she has also authored several books, including her most recent work, Cities, the First 6,000 Years. We met Dr. Smith out here in Santa Monica, California, where the Pacific Ocean and the city intersect. Santa Monica is a good example of the land-water interface, much like many ancient cities thousands of years ago. This convergence allows scientists like Monica Smith and her research colleagues to study today's city water landscape that goes back to the very beginnings of cities. Because, as Smith explains, sustainability was even an issue back then. Like Santa Monica, many cities past and present are situated where the land-water connect. Take ancient Cairo, Athens, Rome, or Venice, for example. These ancient cities with their storied past were all interconnected with rivers, lakes, or the sea. And these cities of yesteryear were much like today's coastal port cities, everywhere from Los Angeles and Seattle on the West Coast to Miami and New York on the East Coast, to Corpus Christi and Houston on the Gulf Coast. This geographic landscape allowed for ancient cities and today's cities to advance and prosper. There was a development of water transportation for goods, agricultural produce, and raw materials. Even today, water transport is still the cheapest way of shipping goods in our high-tech era. The presence of water also enabled city residents to utilize that source for daily use. And rivers then and now have historically been an easy way to get rid of urban industrial waste. Today, rivers and waterways have also provided what has become the creation of river walks, which have sustained tourism and some local economies throughout the U.S. These river walks can be found in places like San Antonio, Oregon City, and St. Cloud, Minnesota, and possibly one day in Los Angeles with a final multi-billion-dollar revitalization plan of the LA River. However, as Professor Smith explains, this land-water dynamic, while providing great opportunity, has also presented a challenging relationship throughout the centuries, because for thousands of years, rivers, lakes, and seas have also been erratic and unstable neighbors, causing things like floods, mudslides, landslides, leaving cities vulnerable to all types of storm damage, erosion, and other catastrophic disasters.
Cities have always been part of their environments. Even though those of us who live in a city today might feel that we are rather far apart from nature, we don't even engage with dirt, we're not farmers, we still experience Mother Nature. We still experience the weather on a regular basis. We still experience storms, and we also have the risk of natural disasters. Places like California are subject to earthquakes, of course. Places in the Midwest have tornadoes as one of the things that they always have to think about. So Mother Nature provides predictable unpredictability. So things like the weather is predictable within a range, And things like natural disasters are also predictable within a range. You know if you live in the tornado belt that you'll eventually get a tornado, but you don't know which day. That same kind of predictable unpredictability also governs what ancient city dwellers had to live with. They lived within an environment that had rivers and lakes and streams. They were able to get rainwater or snowfall on a regular basis, but they also had to deal with the occasional challenges that Mother Nature provided.
Professor Smith explains that some of these challenges are rooted in what she terms the watery margin of cities, something she says that so many cities, past and present, have dealt with.
We can think about cities as being engaged with water in a whole variety of ways. In fact, most cities, both ancient and modern, are in places where they are touching the water, because rivers and lakes and shorelines have been wonderful places for people to live and have easy access to water for industry and commerce. But water is, of course, a very dynamic thing. Sometimes there are floods, sometimes there are unpredictable storms, and so people have developed ways of trying to engineer their way out of the challenges that nature provides. So we build things like seawalls, which we can see in ancient cities. The Romans were very good at this. Even though the Mediterranean is a very placid kind of ocean, it still has storms, and they were still concerned about things like coastal erosion and occasional storms that would destroy ports and other infrastructure. We also know that people are engaging with canalization. They're trying to channel the water even as it comes into an urban environment. So there's always this desire to modify the built environment and to make nature behave. But we know, of course, that nature doesn't always behave. So we have to be prepared for that too. Because nature is unpredictable, we know that one season varies from another, and we have that experience in the course of our lifetimes. Some years it rains a lot, some years it doesn't rain so much. What we see over the course of time is that ancient leaders were particularly interested in using infrastructure to be able to even out those time periods of abundance and lack in the natural environment. So people created canals and reservoirs, they created cisterns and wells. For example, if you think about great ancient cities in Mexico, like Chichen Itza, there were places called cenotes, which were places of collecting water during the rainy season to serve over times of drought. So the idea of collecting and saving water is something that has been part of ancient urban life for a very long time. Sometimes the engineering expertise comes along with architectural expertise to produce very beautiful landscape modifications like the aqueduct. And the Romans built more than 1,000 aqueducts all around the Mediterranean, in places like France and Spain, in Jordan and Syria and Tunisia. And those aqueducts would sometimes go for tens of miles to carry water in a gentle gradient from the mountains into the heart of cities, where they would supply fountains and drinking water, and also a lot of water for industrial purposes like glass making and other forms of crafts.
Dr. Smith says many of the infrastructure examples from our ancient world are evident in today's world cities, everywhere from Los Angeles to London, New York to New Delhi. And as Smith explains, people often identify ancient cities with places like Jerusalem or Babylon, Rome or Athens. However, Smith says ancient cities like Mesopotamia, even ancient cities of China, also set a blueprint for today's cities, a blueprint for opportunity.
Even when cities had an abundance of water, people still wanted more. One great case study is the ancient city of Chang'an, which is close to the modern city of Xi'an in China. And Chang'an was famous in ancient times, 2,000 years ago, for being a place where 8 river bodies met. And still, the city founders and those who were managing the water supplies of Chang'an put in a reservoir. The same thing is true in cities all over the world, that even if there is a river or a lake, people are always interested in having more water bodies. So, for example, in Iowa City, you've got 3 reservoirs in addition to the river. In many parts of the United States, you have cities that also depend on wells and reservoirs and rivers and canals. Canals were one of the ancient world's multiple-use pieces of infrastructure. Today, we mostly think about canals as something that is part of an older way of life. But canals used to be the most important kind of transit and the most important kind of waterways. So in ancient Mesopotamia, you saw canals lead off from the river into the heart of Mesopotamian cities. In places all around the world, you also saw canals becoming a supplement for the waterways like ports. So even in modern Tokyo, for example, people are still moving goods around by canal, even though we have highways and railroads and many other forms of transportation. Because so many cities were located on the margins of rivers, they also used those rivers to connect to others. So if you look at cities in the United States today, for example, you might be surprised to look at the Missouri River or the Mississippi River as a connector between places that you didn't necessarily thought were connected. One of the ways that cities are linked together is not only by roads, but also by waterways, including natural rivers. Here in the United States, we have the Missouri River that goes all the way from Great Falls, Montana, through Bismarck, North Dakota, all the way down to St. Louis, through Omaha, Nebraska. That is a connectivity that means that the drops of water that fall in the western United States come right into the heartland of America. From St. Louis, then, the Mississippi joins up and goes through Natchez and Baton Rouge down to New Orleans, another great port in which the water of the land meets the water of the sea. The same thing is true in ancient cities, where you've got multiple cities that line up along a riverbank. So think about the Nile as a connector not only of ancient cities, but as a connector of people and materials that went up to places like the pyramids so that they could be constructed. In India, you've got the Ganges River that links many large population centers. And even in West Africa, ancient cities like Timbuktu, which we think of as being kind of famous desert oases, are actually right next to a river too. We think about places like the Riverwalk in San Antonio, which is a big economic engine in San Antonio. It produces a lot of jobs, entertainment, and tourist draw. In other cities, rivers have been a little bit neglected or overlooked, or maybe sometimes we're a little afraid of them because we only think of them as a problem in terms of flooding or other kinds of natural disasters. Here in Los Angeles, we have an opportunity with the Los Angeles River to be able to create something that is both aesthetically pleasing and environmentally sustainable. Many people are not even quite sure where the Los Angeles River is. But when you think about it on a map, you see that it curves through from the San Fernando Valley, through downtown, and then ends up at one of the world's great ports. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach were created where the Los Angeles River empties into the Pacific Ocean. And the Los Angeles port is the #1 port in the United States. So even though we've kind of forgotten about the Los Angeles River, it has not forgotten about us.
And as Dr. Monica Smith continues to span the globe to unearth the past in the hopes of learning more about the present, she continues to dig into the old world and document her findings to further explain how today's cities can learn from ancient cities.